All right, we are live and back. It's been a while for Adventures Kindling episode. I did not change the name in the thing. Okay, I'm gonna do that. But as we get back for another meeting of D&D Addicts Anonymous, aka Adventures Kindling, we have a new person here. So Jess, I'm gonna put you on the spot.
What? No.
I will start, okay? Because we always, even for every episode, we introduce ourselves and then say something random. I've decided for world building today, as we were talking about it, I'm going to, you're going to say your name. Okay, let me load this music. Okay. Name as well as your favorite fictional city.
Oh, that's hard.
Yep. I will say I'm Ash, and one of my favorite fictional cities is the Crystarium, which I can't tell you about because it'd be spoilers.
Yeah.
Oh, Ash, can I use that one?
Nope. That's why I took
You
it.
suck.
Yeah, I took it on purpose.
Well, I'm Jessica. Favorite fictional city, right?
Yes.
Can you get back to me on this?
Sure. Who wants to go instead? Save Jess from the hot seat.
I'm struggling just as much. It's so hard.
Any fictional city or like
Any fictional city.
specifically
D&D or like a favorite book or movie, any media. Doesn't even have to be fantasy. It could be modern as well or whatnot. It has to be fictional though. I don't want a real life city because, you know, we're storytellers.
So a fake version of New York City would work.
It does if you tell me what's different about it.
Wow. Okay.
Because New York City setting's great, right? But what is so different about your New York City setting?
It's special.
And how is it special, Saf?
I'm kidding. I don't know.
I'm trying to think of like stories that I particularly like.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm more of like the fan fiction type, so like a lot of the world building comes from the fan fiction rather than like the actual canon.
Well, let's start with this. Just
Version.
name the city and then the one thing that you find really cool about it, right? It doesn't even have to be your favorite, but like a city that stood out to you and what element of it like made it stand out. I will give another example that I can talk about. There's a city in a book I like that's called Thiru, and what's very cool about it is it's like almost like the Tower of Babel. It's a huge tower, right? But it is fully like steep on one side and then has layers on the other side, because in that world there's something known as the Everstorm, which always flies from one direction to the other and cycles back. And so one of the sides of the city is always straight to buff it against the storm.
That's really cool. I feel like my problem is that there's a lot of cities I can think of that are part of series that I like, but the city itself isn't particularly pleasant. I just like the property that it belongs to.
Like the book or the media.
Yeah, like I keep thinking of Ankh-Morpork, which is like a terrible place in the like no one wants to live there, but it's part of Discworld and it's like it's so fun because there's like so much happens there. And I just love Terry Pratchett's writing, and so it's just like a really fun city to be in when you're reading it, like to read about, but I wouldn't want to live there at all, and I don't think it's like a particularly cool city. It's just a city.
Is there anything special about it in the book that's like as a city, like I could only do like only these events could have happened in the city?
I mean, it's full of stuff. There's like the only thing I can think of is like the Unseen University, which is the like wizard school that's very kind of silly and ridiculous.
Also introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm Nora. I play D&D.
Nice. And your favorite city is, or like the city, not a favorite city, it's the city that comes to mind is?
Well, I was thinking of Ankh-Morpork, but if I
Yes.
had to pick a favorite city,
Oh,
that
okay, you got one?
I would be basic and say it's maybe not a city, but like Lothlorien from Lord of the Rings. That might just be because I just reread Fellowship, but like
No, hell yeah.
I would want to live there.
We gotta
It's
hit
so
the classics.
cool. Yeah, trees.
Ooh,
We love
okay. Yeah.
I haven't read this group, but like I know it by reputation a lot. Like there's a lot of really good world building in there.
Mhm.
And okay, since Ash stole this Crystarium, I'm thinking like I have too many types of mediums to think through. Like, do I think through like manga or anime or fiction? Um, I really liked one fan fiction, but they basically built their own like city from the ground up after their last city like got razed by their enemies. So they had to
Oh.
rebuild a fortress basically, and it was cool because it used a lot of like special abilities from different races. Like they had basilisks that could turn stone into like liquid to make it more malleable, or
Oh.
like turn wood into stone to like be support pillars. So like, or like they could like fireproof the roofs with by turning like the wooden roofs to stone, which would protect it from fire arrows from the enemy, right? And like
Mhm.
this is a lot of like innovative stuff that's both domestic and war potential, because they were in the middle of enemy, not enemy territory, but they were on the front lines, right?
Mhm.
This was a fort. So basilisks were like a new creature that had only been around for a few years, so like this is like very innovative techniques, which I thought was cool. So
Yeah.
it's a city called New Haven in a fanfiction, but it's a fanfic. So in terms of like actual published cities,
Fanfics
aesthetically,
count, I'm saying.
yeah. I also really like the Waterlight City in a comic called Ghostblade,
Oh, yes.
which is so beautiful. It's sort of like underground, and their lighting is all by like these like flying fireflies or butterflies. But I really love their like really open, wide architecture.
You have to find that art for these two. They need to see that.
Yeah.
No,
Just search up Waterlight City. I think it's like the first result. It's so beautiful. But yeah, aesthetics wide, Waterlight City, world building. I think that fanfiction with New Haven, where they were doing a bunch of innovative techniques with a bunch of different races and
Yeah. Giving the city
domestic.
character through all these, like, hey, we have this.
Yeah, because like the person that was making the city, they didn't have a lot of resources, right?
Mhm.
Like even though they were on the front lines, they were like a really young commander, and they didn't have like a lot of political push at that time. So she made do with her refugees by good training and innovative thinking. You know, like putting a lot of traps and bombs in the entrance so that if anybody tried to attack, they could set off the bombs.
Yeah. Like function, right? A lot of functional infrastructure.
Yeah.
All right. Saf, you got anything?
I don't know. The only thing that I can think of city-wise is probably, well, it's not like a specific city in general, but I've seen there's art of general like cityscape designs in the League of us, particularly in the continent of Ionia. But I think the way that they chose to integrate like nature with architecture, and how they kind of like drew out kind of the magic that like weaves within not just the landscape but through the buildings is pretty cool. So not a specific city, but I guess
Like
I
a
don't have
city in
specific city.
Ionia, right? Like, even if we don't have a name, right? I remember
Yeah.
because you showed me some art of this.
Yeah. I think there's a city called Ionia City, but that's not really my answer.
Yeah.
Just a general like city in any city in Ionia is probably pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Hell yeah. All right. And that was an icebreaker I kind of want to start into, because we're talking about world building this episode, and that is a wide topic, has a lot of different styles associated with it. But to start us off, right? I wanted to talk about how all of us have been players and some of us have DM'd, and so we understand the necessity of world building sometimes, right? I want to know like one world building time, like as a DM you had or as a player you saw, that like stood out to you and suddenly made things either more immersive or just more engaging.
A moment, you say?
Yeah, like a single like world building technique that either your DM used or even you could have used as a player in your backstory that you really fell in love with.
I think one of my fondest backstories of the character so far was Tess's.
Yeah.
I mean, partly she's like, she has the longest history, so it's like the most developed.
Yeah.
But
50 sessions strong.
but you know, something about like a pirate water coast city at the same time, like on the cliffside monastery, is
very aesthetic, right? You like that imagery.
Yeah, it's the image. There's a lot of implications about like being part of a underground society. Like, what's the economy like, right? What's the governance like in such a city?
Yeah. What's the relationship between the legality of it and the criminal underworking?
Yeah, is it like, do they have a separate understanding, or is it like it's all entirely run by criminals and it's just like they're just superficially you know, pretending to be law-abiding, or is it like completely run by pirates and like the lords have no control over it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, like I always loved like imagining that cliffside monastery in Tessa's thing, because she grew up in it and it was very like, Tess was an orphan, right? So this became her home and she had to get used to it at first and then learn. Like, she very much became one of the, like, you know, head monks, not head monks, but like, you know, like
head disciples
that you knew the face of, right? Everyone knew Tess because she grew up here. They didn't come here as a pilgrimage or found their life here.
It's also interesting because part of Tessa's backstory is like she was rescued by these people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, you know, they're not doing like legal things either.
Yes.
So there's clearly some like enforcement of some rules, where they like go out and like enforce the rules, right?
Yeah. So Tess was kind of sculpted not to like fully be like, okay, yeah, there's this evil and this good, right? But she's more like, yeah, you gotta be practical sometimes. Hell yeah. No, that's great, and it also affects your character a lot, where you come from, like, all those factions in play. And I think that's a great example. Anyone else have something in mind, like that, a world building thing you decided with a backstory that really affected how your character turned out?
I feel like I'm not very good about character backstory in general, so I'm not sure.
Well, you have DM then. What has been one of your favorite things in terms of world building as a DM?
I mean, this is something we've talked about quite a bit, so it's probably something we'll talk about more in depth.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I kind of embraced doing as I got more experience DMing was letting my players world build for me. Because I'm kind of a control freak, and so when I first created Amaldra, which is like, you know, the world that I have been slowly working on more and more, that I run all my games in, I was like, no, everything has to be this way, and like I don't want people to change it because it like exists in my brain. It was like my brainchild, and then like the more I got influence from, especially Aaron and Saf, because they were the first people to interact with that world, their ideas were really good, and I was like, oh, I should like, it taught me to be open about like player input, and that has been really fun because especially with like I talk about Aaron a lot, but he has really good world building ideas, and we just like are able to riff off each other a lot, and so it's been really fun like with him, and then with you and the other and Saf and the other players who I've had in Amaldra, like adding stuff, and I mean we like a big addition recently has been your character's patron.
Yeah.
Someday I will run that game, I swear. But like I'm so excited to have something like a new thing in the world that got created by a player. Like that's so much fun.
Yeah, that's one of my like favorite things that I've come to love is like, you know, not forcing yourself into a box of like, okay, this is the world and how everything works, right?
Yeah.
And like what the first time I did that was just like, okay, like I stayed away from my own homebrew setting for a while just because it got away from me in terms of like trying to figure out everything and then not being actually in play during a session. And then when I ran my first one shot, for the first time in a while in a homebrew world, right? I was just like, I want to engage these players, so I'm involving their backstory, but what if I involve it all the way into the world lore? What if I like literally just Jess, right? Your first character, 10, you had a partner who was persecuted for their demonic skin, their demonic heritage, right? That's created all the lore for like that tiefling persecution in Orzier. Right? And it's affected not just your story, but so many other stories. And it's like something that I also have prime examples on because it's happened to characters.
Yeah, that's a big deal in Orzier. Like,
Yeah.
that, I mean, that definitely affected No Quarter with, with the
With B.
The dude who Crag, the construct.
Yeah.
Like, and the whole, yeah, that's cool that came from like, did you have ideas about that at all before, or was it just from that character's backstory?
It was that character's backstory that like first triggered, okay, so tieflings are persecuted. Why are they persecuted? And then all those other questions I started to answer.
That's really cool.
Like, and then for No Quarter context, Jess, right? They found an ancient sort of ruined stuff, right? Where the defense mechanism was activated because a tiefling in their party stepped into the center of it where it was like holding something. Right? Because it was like, a tiefling is here, that's not allowed. Action mode.
Yeah, and then we had to kill my friend.
Yeah.
Racist defense mechanisms.
Yeah. I would say for me, Worldbuilding Origin has been a ton of fun for that reason of just like, I can now, like I've said before, I have prime examples of like why things are so important. Like the church is a huge thing also, right? That came from V's backstory where she wanted to belong to a church and be a very holy person. And like in her backstory, like the church seemed to have a lot of influence. I was like, okay, why does it have influence? You know, why are tieflings persecuted? And then the ideas mesh together.
I love that. I definitely want to get more of that in Amaldric. There's still a lot of stuff. I don't think I've done anything really major with Amaldric yet. I guess Sadea is pretty. It's been almost completely shaped by like character backstory. But I'd love to get more of that, like major world events being shaped by players.
No, the one you're going to run with the dragons is a huge one. That I'm super excited about because I always love historical one-shots. And just for some more context, right? Nora is running a historical one-shot that occurred hundreds of years ago after a war, which dragons were allied with the city-state. But after the war, that city-state decided to hire adventurers and people to basically exterminate the dragons. And so there are no dragons today because of this event that we're actually going to get to play out.
So is the story set in like historical where they are from the future where dragons and people are no longer allies, but like they're going back to the past?
No, it's a one shot, so we made characters from that time period.
Yeah, so everyone's from, it's all set 200 years in the past. And like all the characters were lived through the war that just happened and now have been like hired to go take out the dragons.
That's rough, buddy.
It's pretty rough. Ash, your character is pretty rough.
What do you
My
mean?
God.
I just want to kill some dragons.
And be sad.
Be sad, you know? You always have to have a little bit of angst sprinkled in.
Yeah. We've got the happy hedgehog and the angsty dragon hunter.
It's such a good combo. Holy shit. Meg and I had so much fun making our two guys like friends because it's such a good contrast and we pull each other in other directions.
I love the like classic D&D angsty character and the absolute meme. Meg's character is literally called Sonic.
Yeah.
And he's a hedgehog. Like that's a good combo. I like that.
Yes.
I'm also excited, Saf. I have stuff for your character that I need to send you, but I just haven't like transitioned it from my brain onto a Discord message. So someday I'll get you that information before we run the game.
Take your time.
Any spot of world building in either yours or someone else's games that you really liked, Sav?
I guess this was kind of more of a general statement, but like, well, here's the thing. My characters' backstories are one or two different spectrums. They're either very integrated into the world, or they're not at all. In the case of the characters who have backstories that are integrated into the world, of course, the world building, like the details, determine the backstory itself. But I think what I really like is knowing about the specific culture of the culture of the characters' like surroundings.
Yeah, where they came from or where they grew up.
Particularly because like even if I had a trope of the personality that I wanted to go with, the culture is still what builds the base of their personality. So it can be like, even if I wanted to go a certain way, would the culture cause it to act in a different way, or would it like amplify their worst traits or their best traits, or something, any of the sorts. I really like knowing kind of about what kind of like the expectations of the people, to say the least.
Has there been like a favorite character whose culture you've really loved going to the psychology of and how it affects your character?
I think the one character that I could think of is probably Kasan. Because even though he grew up as nobility, his time in a chaotic, corrupted city definitely has affected him. More ways than one. And I really enjoyed implementing that into his personality when I actually played him.
Garbage town.
Just a rich kid in a garbage town.
That is like Kellen and Sadea are very different, so that's an interesting like transition, I'm sure, for him, going from the like clean, nice, noble place to just
the slums. Just the trash. Yeah, but I think I really, if I played him more in like more like sessions / maybe a different one shot, I think it would be interesting to see kind of the contrast, especially since I know what happens to him after the one shot.
So
when is that happening?
That's actually really interesting, and this is probably getting off topic, but like because Sadea was set before. So my first game in Amaldris, the Kellen campaign, which never got finished.
Okay, it's after Sadea.
Yeah, so Sadea's in the past, and during the Kellen campaign, Kassan is in Kellen and
Mhm.
married.
Oh
And
shit! Okay.
I never told Saf who his spouse is.
You
Um,
know you got married.
so he's married to a mystery person, who I know.
I made this before
Yeah.
before I made Kassan into a full-fledged character.
Oh wait, you weren't even playing them in the Kellen campaign.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's an NPC in Kellen.
Oh shit! Okay.
When is that happening?
I know. I need to see. I'm probably gonna. We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Not to get. Yeah.
All right, getting back into world building a bit. Here is a topic I definitely want to touch on now that we've gone through some like insights and started talking. As a player or a DM, right? If backstories count as well, right? What's your favorite aspect to start world building first, or just helps you connect all the dots? Nora, I think we should start with you because I know you have an answer ready.
Yeah. I mean, this maybe isn't a good place to start, but the thing that I always think about is like I've said a million times, the weird little details. Like,
Mhm.
I think usually one of the places I tend to start, at least what I did for Amalja, was I thought a lot about architecture, which was probably just a result of I was in like an architecture focused class at the time in
Mhm.
college, and so that's where my brain was at. But it's always things like I love thinking about like, okay, what do the buildings look like? What are the crops they grow? Like, how does the geography of the area like affect life? And I feel like one of the things that I'm a little bit sad about that I want to work in the future is I haven't been able to bring that into my games as much, and I'd love to maybe run a full-on campaign in Amaldra someday so that I can actually like be like, okay, see that play out in a game, because I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah. Wait, so I wanted to get more details. So crops that are grown is one example. Are there other examples of these details you spoke of?
I mean, the crops is a little bit more recent for Imaldra. The thing that I thought about a lot, especially when I was making the map, was geography.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, okay, what's the climate like? So like Sadea, what's a good example? Like Caleth particularly is like an arid, like cool climate. And so I was thinking about like, okay, just what's it like to live there, I guess, versus like Sadea is warmer, and they have it's going back to the crops, but they have more like luxuries, like they can grow sugarcane, for example. Like they have access to different stuff, and also just things like, okay, like where are the rivers, like how long does it take to get between different places, and like how does that affect how places interact. Like Caleth is really isolated, so like why are they like that? I don't know, stuff like that.
Yeah. And I definitely want to hear other people's answers, but about that same point, because you just said you want to apply it more so in your games. Do you have ideas of how you might want to apply one of those?
Honestly, I'm not sure yet. That's why I've struggled with it, because it's such like niche stuff. I mean, I've seen a little bit of like, for example, the area west of Kellen is very much like farmland and plains, and they grow a lot of like tea, and a few different crops. And so what spawned that was that one of my players in Kellen grew up on like a tea farm, and so I was like, okay, that's the kind of crops they have there. And so that came into backstory stuff, but it never really came up in game so much.
If Nora's okay with it, I would love for this also be a place where we can like bounce ideas off each other and talk about it. So if anyone like has any ideas for how to bring these effects to light, like I'll start with one. We just start about like this tea farm, tea leaves, right? It can be something simple, just like, you know, a job to deliver something, right, to these tea farms, or to come back to the city with their produce. But also things like, you know, the tea farms were attacked. Was that due to the economy? Does someone, a villain in the campaign, target the tea farms and maybe other produce, right, because it's giving them power over a certain family or over things like that?
Yeah, I think... Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just gonna say that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think like bringing economy into the world is always like something interesting when you have like a specific aspect to it. So if it's tea, maybe like you have specialty tea products whenever the characters are traveling around. And then I think it's always interesting when you have like trade disagreements. It's like, oh, we ordered this batch of specialty tea, but you're undercutting us, or like you're mixing in the bad tea with the good tea, which is a legit thing that happens, because I've definitely bought like fake ass tea from China where it smells really good, but then you brew it and it tastes like leaf water. So, you know, if you ever want to have your characters complaining about
getting cheated by their tea.
Yeah, shitty tea. Getting cheated. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I think the one thing where I could see working that in is like stuff that I never actually got to use for Kellen, just because we never got very far. But like they're next to a forest, and so I decided one of their main exports is like artisanal. Like they do a lot of like wood products and like wood carving, and that's kind of their like specialty. But there are things like I made tavern menus and like different establishments that specialize in certain products that are special to that area. So like there was a whole like drinks menu that was like, oh, here are the wines that are from like this area of Amaldra and stuff. So it's like really small details, but I think that's fun to work in.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely like, I love the details being small, but if anytime you want to put a spotlight on them, it's okay to make them bigger too, because my head goes to, right, like DM instincts. Okay, so this detail about the world, if I were the BBEG, how would I take advantage of this to wreak some havoc? Right? And I don't know, for me, I love that question just because it definitely puts the spotlight on this little detail in the world now. If like it can be abused by someone, how is it abused, and how does that affect the plot such that the characters can intervene?
Yeah. What's funny about that idea, honestly, is Kellen, part of it is there's like chaos being wreaked, and in case I ever actually finish it, I don't want to say what it is because Saf is here, but like there is something going on where like chaos is being caused, and that's absolutely something I could focus on, is like disrupting supply or something like that would fit perfectly into that campaign.
Ooh, yeah.
And if you disrupt supply, that could have bigger consequences, like in your main hub of city or something.
That's a good idea. I'll have to think about that.
I personally really like when logistics are a concern in the story, especially if it's like a bigger scale, like longer term battle or something like that, or even just like, you know, the day-to-day running of like a large settlement or city. It's like I don't know if it works as much in a narrative context or always, but like it definitely adds to the flavor, I think.
This is how you know Jess is the one that keeps track of notes and supplies in the other campaign.
96 bottles of insect repellent.
Yeah. Yeah, logistics is fun always. It definitely is a mechanical challenge because you don't want it just to be grind work, but it's so interesting to think about in terms of a narrative aspect and just, you know, limiting choices and other choices being like, okay, this logistical plan versus that logistical plan.
Yeah, you don't always want the details, but you do want it to have an impact because it makes it much more, I think, believable, right?
Yeah, and it adds weight to the stuff you're doing.
Weight to the world, right? Yeah. Because like if you can travel willy-nilly, like what are the consequences, right? Like
that actually. Oh, go ahead. I was just gonna say that's funny because actually, like, one of the things I'm really excited for with this one shot I want to run is, and I have no idea how well it's gonna work. Like, this may crash and burn, but it's a traveling caravan of a bunch of adventurers, and they're going through a wasteland essentially. And so I'm excited to incorporate like how the environment impacts their travel, because they're only going to have so much supplies and so many like people, and if they do poorly in certain events that happen, like that will impact, I want that to impact their final battle, or like how the rest of the adventure goes.
Hell yeah.
Ooh, maybe
I'm excited
something
for that.
would be like if I don't know, like maybe if there's like settlements in this wasteland, but maybe there's like some like cultural like they don't like people outsiders, right? And so people that travel from place to place might have a bad association, but at the same time they might bring like necessary goods from settlement to settlement or communication.
Ooh. Applying that to some of my own like areas and ores here, that's a fun idea.
I think especially in like fantasy elements, because like on the one hand, like, you know, there is some forms of instantaneous communication, but it's not quite as widespread as like, you know, our society today. So it's interesting to think about like communications between large like places that are far away,
Yeah.
and who would know it, and how do we want to spread it, right?
Yeah, because especially in this context, I mean, it's a recent. This is like the site of a war, basically. So it's only in the last like 5 years that this whole area has been devastated, and so like there wouldn't be established communication. Like it'd be very dangerous and cut off from the rest of the world. So that's an interesting thing to think about, is like how that impacts people's attitudes, like the people that are potentially out there. I do have a question. I don't know if it'll be relevant to this group, because it sounds like we all kind of, I don't know, like maybe different levels of detail oriented, but we at least like all like talking about how, you know, logistics and how different things impact. But like, do we all kind of enjoy that kind of world building, or have you played in campaigns or also enjoy world building that's very simple and like just like it does its function? And I guess like classic D&D worlds, almost like there's like, here's the town, here's the city.
Yeah.
Like
The quest
don't
is
worry
what's
about
important,
details.
not everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have enjoyed that in moments. Sorry, someone was gonna say something.
I mean, I think it's more about like implementation rather than is it good or bad, because like if it's woven in, I think in a good way, then like it enhances. But if it sort of like detail on top of detail and not, and like distracting when say the group is trying to do something, then at the same time it can be too much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was gonna bring up a similar point in that I usually world building and lore, my go-to is you don't want to thrust it in your player's face. Instead, you leave like seeds and threads that if they tug on, boom, there's a bunch more. Like, I know there are times when it can become overwhelming or it's just like a lot to track, right? And you don't want to feel that, or you don't want every episode being a like lore dump.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
That's
and,
it. Yeah. That's. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, sorry, go for it.
I was just gonna say, it makes me think of like, I definitely like this idea of, and there's a quote about it, and I can't remember who it's by or what the quote is, but basically about like, at least for writers, you should know way more than you put in the final draft of your writing. And I feel like similarly with world building, where I want to know as much as possible about my world, and then like the players only see a little bit, but like you said, if they pull on a thread or if there's something that comes up, like it's there, you have something to draw on.
Yeah. And the beauty of D&D, I feel, right, is like you can know the basic outline how the world works, and if you do that, like, and a player does something, you can like pull on the thread in the moment yourself too, for yourself, and improvise. Yeah, this would lead to this, then that's how that would work.
Mm-hmm.
And as storytellers, you can even enhance that in terms of like, okay, so this is kind of how this would work. I'm not sure, but what would be cool for it to work this way, right? And just like suddenly validate a character's decision based on like, yeah, this would happen, and like this, you know, it would like scale to this. large incident.
Yeah, kind of like running with what players do and seeing how that impacts your world.
Yes.
That's really cool, yeah.
Nora, not really on topic, but like since we talked about it earlier, I think it deserves mention again. Like that video you talked about with like historical clothing in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Like it's not always necessarily going to be, I think, the like you need to have those sort of details when you're describing in D&D, because that's like clothing can be is very visual, which works well for a visual medium, but like describing something over a voice, it can be harder. At the same time, like clothing tells so much about a person and the world, because there's the person wearing it, there's the infrastructure that had to go into creating and then transporting the materials, and like, you know, there's magic, of course, but like if there's no magic involved, then there's just like so much work goes into clothing, like fabric and then also like decorative, and then the stitching. Like weaving is such a big thing that I don't think, you know, most worlds never really consider it, but like it takes more time to weave like the sails of a ship than to actually like saw down the wood and construct a ship, just because like
Yeah.
you have to collect the cotton or you know, the fleece, and then you have to spin the thread, and then spinning the thread is like a full-time job, and then weaving it is like, anyways, I have feelings on
I will say,
weaving.
as a person who was taught by Jess just to sew a bead bag together, that shit's hard.
It's a lot of work, especially by hand. That's actually a really good point. Like, I don't know. I also love costuming stuff, and that's something that I'm probably gonna start thinking about for Amalja more, which will never get used. But like, it is so cool to think about how, yeah, like the time commitment, and the materials and the transportation, and like one of the things that in that video that was talked about was how the value of materials affects who wears them, and also how like the time affects it. And so for somebody who doesn't have a lot of time on their hands, like that's a valuable, like that becomes almost a currency. So if you have time to like work on your clothes or have a servant work on your clothes, like that implies that you are wealthier, stuff like that. Yeah, exactly, status. So that's something really cool. Definitely, like, just thinking about it off the top of my head, because I've kind of thought about like livestock and agriculture. I have like my really isolated kind of northern settlement that would absolutely be like furs and wool and that sort of thing, and like probably more practical, versus like Sedea and Manacor, which are southern and very wealthy, and both Manacor especially like is the trade center sort of Amaldra, would absolutely have like luxurious clothing and like so many more resources to work with, and so that would definitely affect the look of the people in the city.
Yeah, I want to run with it a bit, because clothing is usually not focused on as much in world building, but it's a great element. And I thought of a time I remember it was really good. I don't know if anyone here has read the Stormlight Archive, but one thing it was a really cool clothing thing, right? Basically, in that culture, right, of the main continent, of like the main country, right, girls aren't supposed to show off their left hand, because it's kind of like you only show it to your husband or like, you know, family, right?
It's like the ankles.
Yes, exactly. In that role, it becomes like your left hand is your, like, you know, sacred, you know, place. And so it creates so much fashion choices, because now not only do we have clothes that cover the hand, but we have like distinctions between class. For instance, someone very low tier, right, might not afford or like even think about covering their left hand, right? It just leaves it open because they have to work and do other things. But as we go higher, right, like middle tier, people wear a glove, right? on their left hand always. And then at the highest tier, you have these gorgeous gowns where the sleeve extends and like is buttoned such that your hand will never slip out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very cool aspect in that book that like they pointed it out early, but then you got to see it in so many different applications.
Yeah, that's really cool to like see. It'd be so fun to add some detail like that too. Like I don't have any ideas off the top of my head, but something that's like an obvious.
Yeah, it like stands out right from the
difference.
get-go.
Yeah.
And then you get to explore that and see like, oh yeah, how does it, intertwine with society?
Totally. I'll have to think about that for Mana Court because I haven't run anything there yet, and they're absolutely like the height of luxury merchant city.
Mhm.
So that'd be a good place to implement that.
Yeah.
I've only read the first one, but like now that I think about it, wouldn't it be like stupid easy for a noble woman in high society to just like sneak like a knife up that sleeve or something?
Yeah.
Oh,
I if it comes into play later series, spoilers, I don't know.
It kind of gives you also a look into that culture, right? Because they follow like men and women different roles. Men were very military-esque, while women were usually down the scholarly road, right?
Mhm.
And so it became very like, almost foreign, the concept that women could be assassins. And so, like,
Taking advantage of gender norms.
exactly.
Big sleeves can hide a lot.
Yeah.
That's dangerous. I still can't get over this. I'm sorry, this is diverting a little bit.
No,
but
go for
in
it.
Saf, I don't know if you saw this stuff ever, but like we were at the LARP we went to.
Mhm.
Somebody had big sleeves like that, and literally I looked at her and I watched her, and she pulled like 3 drinks. She pulled like snacks and drinks out of her sleeve, and I was like, I never thought of that. That's incredible.
Oh
Like,
my
you could just
god.
put anything there, just sew pockets in.
Wait, who was it?
It was Grandmaster Vega.
Oh my god.
It was incredible.
Oh, ancient, like, not ancient, but like even like medieval, like basically not modern day girl pockets. Like those dresses,
Yeah.
so many pockets.
Mm.
Like once you start watching historical videos, you were like, oh my god, that's so much pocket space.
Right? Like the big pockets that you just like the
Yeah, that go under the skirt, right?
exactly, yeah. Or even like when like hip oh my gosh, what are they called? It's not a crinoline, it's just like the hip piece that's literally hollow. Like you could just use that as a giant pocket. Just like cut a hole in the side of your skirt and have a massive pocket.
Yeah, it's like not built into clothes. You just tie a pocket onto yourself. It's like a
Yeah.
bag, the pocket. I mean, yes, it's kind of like a bag, but they're pockets.
Yeah.
Like you don't have to like take them off.
It's underneath, so it's a pocket.
Anyway, sidetrack.
No,
also-
that's a good point.
Oh, speaking of merchanting, I was like, Nora, like thinking, like wealth and stuff. Another way to show off, like, would be again like lots of cloth, like the
Yeah.
ancient, like the Greek like togas, right? Was it Roman togas? Greek. I'm probably insulting like.
I mean, both of
Ancient
them
is-
have statue-wise, like have extremely flowy. That's actually a really good point. Like I wonder.
Yeah,
I mean, we don't have good examples, but yeah, like they have very flowy, like not pleated, but a lot of yardage kind of.
yeah, you know that like the type of like clothing where like it's one hand just full of cloth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's not practical at all because like you just have to hold it in your arm and it's
Mhm.
tiring. But it's all about showing off your wealth and cloth and stuff, right? So only like really high, like position like politicians and stuff could wear it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of like wealth, that brought me to the idea, Nora, I discussed with you on like peasants getting married, right? And I did a bit of research for medieval times, right? And peasants back then, like they can't afford a ring, right? And so
Oh yeah.
what they used were coins. They would break a coin in half, give it to the groom and bride instead of rings.
Aww.
And I love that aspect, and I definitely like applied it to character, and it's just those little details, right, just give you more enhancement and just like yeah, this is the kind of life he came from. He couldn't afford a ring, right?
Mhm.
It just, yeah, little details like that, right? Apply to clothing, apply to ceremony, apply to tradition.
I like actually I don't maybe I we talked about this before, but I definitely want to have that still apply in modern day Amaldra, in that like specifically right in that area.
Ooh, okay.
I That's definitely a thing that like stuck around, and it doesn't make sense I think so much anymore because trade has increased, and like there's probably more wealth in that area
Mhm.
since they've recovered.
It's like
Um,
tradition.
but yeah, that's like just something that stuck around.
Local traditions, very
Yeah.
Yeah.
give a little flavor into it.
That's a good example actually of ways that things like the distribution of wealth and trade and all the stuff we've been talking about can apply in game, even in small ways. Is just like, especially if you establish like what it's been like in the past, how does that impact?
Mhm.
That's like good backstory material. Like, okay, how does that impact people's experience of this area in the present? Like, what are the traditions, and
Mhm.
what would your character be like if they were from a specific area?
Yeah. And continuing on like the world building things, like we talked about geography, we talked about food and economy and stuff. There's other aspects I did want to at least touch on. One of that being factions, I think is a huge part of world building, and one of the things that I love actually like exploring, because a city can be a faction, right? A city states like and how they act with each other, but you also have factions maybe within the city state, and a lot of for me relationships for world building just come down to factions and factions within factions. Like I'll give an example real quick. Uh, the church is a faction, right? That has influence all over the continent of Vorzir, and it impacts a lot of everyone's living and life. And in the north, instead, we also have a city state sort of called Sheeta, right? And there the gangs hold sway. And so now you have the two different factions in Cheetah, which are two major gangs, and how they interact with the church's influence as it tries to take more and more control. Do you guys have any like notable factions that you've either world built or have loved seeing in media or in D&D?
I mean, this is.
Hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just thinking.
I have kind of a classic example,
Mhm.
which comes from, I guess, like D&D, like a specifically Forgotten Realms
Mhm.
canon, I guess. But the very first campaign I was ever in, we, I got a really good introduction to some of the classic like factions because our characters were allied with the Harpers, and we were
Okay.
going up against the Red Wizards of Thay, and so it was a very, and there was like the Dragon Knights, who I can't remember if that's what they're actually called, but like it was a very like it, it was a cool example of how factions can work because it was so, and those are like such recognizable groups, like the Red Wizards of Thay are like bald dudes who dress in red robes, and so it was very like we got to see how and they were like taking over in our campaign. They had basically
Uh-huh.
taken over Waterdeep. And so it was like a fun kind of, it was kind of very much like, oh, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. But it was interesting to see like how
Yeah, like what kind of
different,
good guys, what kind of bad guys.
yeah, and like there was also some like Dragon Knights from far off who were like starting to invade, and so we got to see how they interacted with the world, like with the Sword Coast, as people who were coming from
Mm-hmm.
like foreigners basically who were invading, and it was.
Jess, for some context, you met two Red Wizards of Thay so far.
Yeah, I did. Rescued one of those
You did.
bitches.
Yeah, I did.
Wow. In my brain, they're just like murder all Red Wizards of Thay. They're bad.
I mean, I'm sure they weren't exactly up to good, but you know, one of them was a kid, and like, I don't know, they
Okay.
threw a fireball on the way out to help us, so YOLO.
Yeah, Jess's character Tess organized a prison break from a pirate base, and one of the prisoners was a Red Wizard with his apprentice. And so, it was literally an old bald guy, Red Wizard, that, like, after he got a spellbook back, flew off, but just fireballed once as a thank you.
parting gifts.
You actually met one more, Jess. Though not
Red
in this
Wizard of-
timeline anymore.
Red Wizard of Thay, or
Yes.
one more Red Wizard?
Not in this timeline.
When was this?
The timeline is a big hint.
Was it in that space?
No. The difference in the timeline, remember, is one person, or not one person.
He wasn't. Wait, he wasn't. He wasn't.
He was not a red wizard, but he had a friend who, told
Yeah. Oh yeah, but that's okay. But that lady wasn't a Red Wizard of Thay, right? She was like from a different faction.
Valindra.
Yeah, Valindra.
Valindra was a red wizard.
What? I thought she was like part of like the like black robed group, something shadowy something.
No,
something.
no, no.
Different color.
She was not part of the Zendaren. She was a red wizard.
Yo, I thought she was part of the Zendaren. What the fuck is up with the Zendaren?
They're doing their other shit.
Shit, I thought they were the same person this entire time. I gotta fix my notes.
Valindra, for context for Northern Saf, was Dave, Lawrence's character's,
X-Flame something.
ex-flame.
Oh,
But, they knew each other from school back
he
when.
fucked up the timeline and then he had to leave.
He only fixed the timeline, and so she did not go down that path. Because it said he, reached out to her when they were back at school. She didn't get expelled and then fell in with the Red Wizard.
I thought
So-
she was dressed in black, Ash.
So does she end up getting married to Dave?
Well, in my head canon, maybe.
Most important question.
She was dressed in black. But
I'm gonna
in my head canon,
ask Lawrence right now.
that would be nice. I would want a happy ending for Valindra, because she, went down some roads. She was wearing black, Jess, and she also didn't tell you she was at the Red Wizards until, very recently.
She was or was not wearing black?
She was wearing black.
Okay, she's.
I'd be Red Wizard.
Why is she a weird?
Because she
why is
doesn't
wearing-
want people to know she's with the Red Wizards. Like Nora said, everyone
Red
knows they're
Wizards.
bad.
But
Yeah,
like,
like,
we have
they're
another
recognizable.
group wearing black. Ash, come on. You can't blame me for associating black wearing evil people with the black evil.
You also
wearing
wear
lady.
black.
I am not wearing black.
Well, your original art, has you wearing black.
I thought it was red. And that's
Either way,
not the
doesn't
point.
matter.
Okay, I'm not a wizard. I'm not a wizard. I'm a monk.
Aha.
Are you bald though?
Yeah, and I'm not bald.
True.
Anyways,
Here, this is the secret tech. I will just let you know, Jess. Valindra in the old timeline was a lich.
Was a
What?
witch?
Was a lich.
Was a lich.
Yeah.
She was undead.
Yeah.
Spooky.
The Red Wizards are into the bad magic, in that they have liches among their number.
Spooky.
Yeah,
So-
they mind controlled somebody in our campaign.
Yeah. If you didn't ally with Valindra, then eventually you would have to fight her as a lich.
That's fucked up.
Yeah, it would have been so good.
We would have had our asses kicked.
A little bit.
Anyway,
Anyway, we're
Building.
getting close to the 1 hour mark, so I would want to do one final little questionnaire for people just to end us off. What is your most favorite piece of world building you've done yourself?
I haven't DM'd, so I'd have to come up with something else.
Your players, your characters have world build, right? Even the recent character we're talking about, right? You made a kingdom.
Okay, but I ripped that one off another game.
That's perfectly fine. I think that's fine because you felt inspired enough by the other game and aspects you liked, right? Everything is just, imitation, which is flattering.
Ash, I think you should start.
I
Yeah.
should start.
You're
Shit.
on the spot.
Fuck.
Oh, how
Okay,
the
okay.
turntables.
See how it feels.
I need to make sure stuff isn't spoiler.
Oh, that's a good point. Could we do the favorite one we've done and the favorite one? Well, maybe that's But the favorite one that we've had, like a player or a fellow player.
Sure, yeah, of course. Yeah, anything that like stood out to you, right? But like, exact example. I'll do it from P&PT stuff that Jess you've already seen, and it's not spoilers because that we're getting close to the end of the tale, so you guys have figured out a lot of the lore. I have a character of one of the players played an orphan, a street urchin, who had no memory of how they became so. And so a lot of aspects I weave together in order for them to be cliche, but the secret heir of the Cholton Empire. And the way these were put together is one of the merchant princes, right, that they knew of since the beginning, was actually a handmaid for the Cholton king and queen who cooed them and led to, the character becoming an orphan and then a lot of things. There was pirates that they met on the way that turned out he was an ex-captain of the guard who, like after shit happened, he became a pirate. And like a lot of aspects came together in that this last session, we actually got that character to meet up with his long-lost siblings who also thought they were orphaned. And for me, I guess that world building just like represents a lot of pieces falling into place and coming together to give that character a moment.
Oh, Ash, I think I know.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about this, but when my character was first created, like she had shared the backstory with another character. So my character Tess, like, considered this other player character Dave her uncle, but recently Dave was left the party willingly.
Retired his character.
Yeah. Dave was retired, so in the story, like Ash as a DM gave us a choice to do you want to like ask Dave to stay or how are you going to respond to his decision, right? So Dave like willingly left to fix his mistakes, but at the same time, like my character Tess was like, she was like, she said she was gonna respect his decision, but when he decided to leave, she still felt betrayed because like she's still like a young girl who considered this like one of her family members, and at the same time she's like an orphan who like went through stuff, and so that someone like decided to leave her family willingly felt like a betrayal to her. So I like that piece of like flavor of, I think it gave me more insight into her character because like she doesn't take that lightly,
Yeah, she's not one to easily get like emotional like that, right? Want to almost do something selfish. And I remember this a lot came, like the world building of your character came from, she's an orphan, grew up in this monastery, but she had this uncle that came around, right? Because he was an elf, he lived a long time, and he just kept visiting whenever she's growing up, and you guys adventured together, right? And in the course, right, you being an orphan, you made a bond with the goddess of orphans and fortune and luck. And that started bleeding away a bit of your humanity to connect to a divine entity.
Yeah. So like that character leaving was like one of her ties to humanity leaving. So like in the future, if she decides to become more divine, or she has to like, like what else of her humanity is she gonna leave, right?
Yeah.
Spicy.
All right, who's next?
Staff, got any ideas?
What was the question?
The question was, what's the favorite point of world building that you have done? Yes, I'm going to say you have done, Saf, because you have DM'd quite a bit.
Damn, I can't account for my player experiences.
Sure, but yes, I gave Jessica because she hasn't DM'd yet, but I want definitely like a world building sort of scenario that you really vibe with that you made with your character's backstory, or like, you made as a DM?
This is
Steph is the
phobic.
queen of
Okay.
character backstory world building.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I make the craziest shit with.
Didn't you just like make that whole thing?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it was mostly Ash, but
We definitely worked on that a lot together. It didn't exist before.
I think I think the thing about me is that I take a lot of other people's input, but I think what even like kind of scares me is the way that my brain kind of goes a million miles an hour even with a single word. Like, I think Nora, you mentioned, remember when like months, like years ago, not years ago, like a year and a half ago, you mentioned the ice cream truck Faye one shot,
Oh god, yeah.
and then months later that just manifested,
Game.
and then that expanded into a world, and then Costco turned into a campaign,
Yeah.
which has a whole myriad of problems on its own.
Oh.
And then getting drunk in D&D, that manifested into running a chaotic bar.
And all the stuff that, yeah, that one shot, man.
Yeah.
We had a long conversation about Orville and Belle.
And Orville's dad, Darian, was
Then I turned the tables.
Their family's fucked up.
yeah. Yeah, it was so good.
But yeah, I guess it's not really a point of world building, but I guess the process of it that I would
Your
consider one of my strengths.
ability to expand on a single phrase.
Blame the brain.
Blame the brain. Or applaud the brain, because now we got a bunch of kick-ass adventures. Alright, Nora.
Oh
You
no.
left us for last, which means it has to be the best.
Oh no. How do we pick like a favorite thing? I guess I really do love thinking about Caleth, which no one has seen. I did send Saf like a little bit of a lore dump on Caleth. But it's very much like it's fun to think about in today because it's kind of a it's very magic and academia based, and so I've had fun thinking about like how that impacts society, and this idea of like how would a city or like a society that is so that cares so much about magic, like how would that impact their life, and like things
More
again,
than like the university in Cydia?
Yeah, Caleth is kind of, they're so isolated that they don't. Sadea likes to advertise, like the university's like, oh, we're the best, like everyone, we know the most, but Caleth is very insular and they don't share their information, and so they're kind of like, they think they're the best, but they don't tell anyone about it, like they don't want to share.
They have a university?
They have an archive, which is probably, I don't know if it's bigger than the university library, but it's certainly older, and has has older texts and things. So they are very academic and very magic oriented. They just don't advertise it. And that's actually something I want to explore more because that's getting off topic. But Helios, who is Ori's sort of patron, has had contact with Caleth and has done some research there, and so they're but yeah, that city in particular has been a lot of fun. I feel like all of the things I enjoy about world building I've sort of been able to apply because I've thought about like what the city looks like architecturally, and then a little bit about like what their society is like and how magic is impacted. Like they have their like magical their weather wizards basically.
Weather wizard.
And so that's been a lot of fun to just be like, okay, how can I throw all of the things that are fun into one place? But I
that's
have also
definitely a
enjoyed.
fun answer. Oh, go for it.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say one thing that I think about a lot is how not world building I've done, but like when you made it, especially Ari, that made me think about because Kelthal has been like one of the original. One of the first things I made about Amaldra was like to come up with that character, and so I got to like think about him a lot more because of that character, and like I'd love to work on him more in the future and see like because definitely their personality changed a lot because it's like, oh, how would they have this little like fairy friend,
Yeah.
and I think that impacted that kind of changed how I think about him a lot, and so that's like a fun world building thing. I want to do something big with him in the future.
Yeah, I loved connecting with that because that seemed like, a real world lore that definitely grounded my character in your setting. Like, that was a very, like, strong mod. Like, I kind of was playing, like, the Little Mermaid sort of esque, and so Kelthal was, like, the one person Ari would have to, like, share these insights, be like, oh, yeah, I want to actually go out. I don't want to stay here like everyone else tells me to. You've seen the world. What's the world like? It was so fun to like build that bond and like have that as like a frame of reference.
Totally. I'd love to build on their dynamic someday. And I think Kellen existed before Maldra existed, and Kelthal is like the founding, like the cornerstone of Kellen in a lot of ways. And so it's super cool to have a character like connected back to him.
Oh man, that's so epic. I love that. This is like this always like epic dude, right? And I just have my little fairy that's just like, hey, want to have some tea and tell me about the story?
Totally. Ari's a really fun character. Definitely need to. Someday we'll run a one shot that she can be in.
Hell yeah. I loved the epilogue I got to have with her where she just like, came out and just like called up Kelthal to tell him all about her day.
Yeah. I like the idea that he just has like an answering machine full of her messages, and sometimes he just like sits down and listens to like Ari's diary.
Oh man. Yeah. World building, oh my god, I feel like we could talk about this so much more. There's like other topics I was thinking about, like weather was something I definitely want to cover because weather's great.
Yeah.
There's factions around. We might do world building part 2 because I know Chrissy and other people would love to get in on this. But yeah, there's so much to do. But when in Rome, you gotta sometimes focus on the cuisine, focus on the clothing, focus on one thing at a time. So thank everyone for like talking about this and hanging out. This shit's always a ton of fun to do. Jess, thank you for making a first time showing.
Cheers.
Hell yeah. You are officially part of D&D Addicts Anonymous now.
Welcome.
Oh no.
Gotta get worse before we can get better is our catchphrase. But yeah, thanks everyone. Dude, good shit. I definitely want to do more of these and not just leave it off for months again. So let's look forward to that.